Beloved, welcome back to the shop. Today we're going to be doing a very in-depth knife review of a fixed blade that was sent to us by our official armorer, RidgeRunnerBlades.com. This is a very unique offering that bridges the gap of two big problems that those of us that are like into this lifestyle that we want to have. Here's the problem. For a long time, man has tried to figure out how to come up with the perfect blade. The two things that were really needed is the utility of an EDC blade, or something that can prepare food, can skin an animal, can do bushcrafting, survival skills, combining that with a soldier's blade, which is pretty much tailor-made for penetrating and killing. These two are very far apart. Is it possible to bring them together into one knife? Well, that's what we're going to look at today. I'm going to be sharing with you the brand newly released, I'm going to go here, the WCFK, the WC field knife, which attempts to do exactly this. Blend a utility knife in a fixed blade that will excel in the daily needs, food preparation, bushcrafting, but also be a soldier's blade that can be pressed into service for that as well. Let's bring it up on top of the toolbox. We're going to go tip to tail and get into this and find out if this is for you. All right, gentlemen, let's get into it. Let's take a look at the WCFK, the WC field knife. So what you have here is a very robust and hard surface fixed blade made out of stainless steel. AEB-L, I looked into AEB-L and it was highly regarded as being a very durable steel. I've been cutting citrus with this and it's unmoved. So unlike some of your high carbons, this is something that you're never going to have to put oil on or deal with. Now, is it as good as some of the state-of-the-art powder metals? Well, you know, that all depends. You know, people say, well, edge retention is going to last longer on these. Well, that's fine. So it gets dull in 2 weeks instead of 10 days, right? That's never really a big selling thing for me. But having it being impervious to corrosion is kind of nice. Definitely got a big handle, bushcraft style handle. This is a handle that's going to be, you know, a bit of a Coke bottle shape. This is going to be designed, just like all of the classic bushcrafting knives, to not develop hot spots, to melt into the hand. If you were to grab a piece of warm clay, this is the shape that is going to come out of it. This is pretty comfortable to most people, something you can have in your hand all day long. Compare it to some of the classic bushcraft knives, you're going to see a lot of similarity here. Two of my favorites you're going to have here, this is the Spyderco Bushcraft right here. Now this is a newer, improved, a hybrid design, or we can take the Deering here, which is going to be, this is going to be classic bushcraft right here. This is Northern Laplanders, the Sami people who live and work with knives all the time, that wear them around their neck, the guys that travel with the reindeer. This is what it looks like. I mean, it's a modern version of it, but it's very similar in that you see no finger choil, which makes the blood run cold on this knife. This knife is not for beginners. One slip of the hand, and you can imagine what happens. But that's traditional, how it was. Now, hybrid in modern days, we're starting to add a bit of a finger choil just for that safety measure. Now, if we take military knives, for example, so we see these influences. Of course, also the Scandi grind you have here. So many of the influences from the bushcraft knives we can see here. But now we need a tactical knife. So let's go to the extreme. So this is a knife that's made for killing. This is just basically a Glock field knife. It's going to be similar to a K-bar. Now, traditionally, military or combat knives have had crossbars, and that's for two reasons. Not talking about, you know, putting it on a rifle, but one, it's to protect the hand from another blade. For if it slides down here, you don't get cut with it. But really, more importantly, it's going to be to protect the hand from sliding forward in extreme situations and getting on the blade. Blood, water, and another thing that was always considered was lack of experience. You got soldiers, you're pressing into the Army, you're putting a knife in their hand. Have they ever used one before? This is added insurance to stop a hand from going up for lack of grip or moisture. You know, so an experienced knife or guys that have held knives for a while, crossbars are not typically used anymore. They're not very handy because when you have to do detail work, they do get in the way, and it makes it really hard to carry them on the body, and this catches and hangs up on a lot of stuff. So this is something that's kind of fallen out of favor. You'll notice this is also on the classic K-bar. So these are definitely the two extremes. So I can see kind of what WC was trying to work with here is to make an amalgamation or a hybrid of these two deals. And I think that it's been very successful. So let's start with the tip here. This knife, as I said, 3/16, it is chunky. That's pretty much the standard. I did research on combat knives, and it's considered 1/8 inch to 3/16 is pretty much standard for a knife that you need to be able to really depend on that's not going to break. It has a faceted tip, actually 5 facets. You think 1, 2, 3, 4, but on the top is another facet. This is going to be an extreme penetrator. Very similar to the arrowheads that were designed by blacksmiths that ultimately overcame, you know, the knights in armor. They developed a piercing blade, I think it was called a bodkin or something like that, that's very similar to this, a chiseled tip that just tore right through armor. So this is kind of building off of that experience. This is something that you could put like right through sheet metal, drywall. It's not gonna break, it's gonna penetrate very deeply, and it's gonna come back and still be intact. You take something, my beloved Tepfer Armory, which is also a soldier's blade, you know, as much as I love this knife, it's not gonna be a penetrator. That right there, that tip is gonna be fragile. So you're looking at a knife here that is a tool knife that is really made for utility with that interesting grind on it and very, very sharp. On a side note, another thing that's very handy with this, when we're talking about utility or bushcrafting, something that's commonly done is making holes. Could be in traps, it could be for trigger mechanisms, but this is a method that's commonly used to open something up or to make a hole in it. And they do relatively a good job at it. This one here does a great job with it. I've actually worked with it and got to open up a hole, actually to these beads, these glow-in-the-dark beads that Jason sent me. They wouldn't fit around my lanyard, and so I just quickly opened it up. So that would be very handy, and that's definitely a utility. So you get piercing, puncturing, a very, very strong tip, and also the ability to do small holes and such. As we back up here, there's so much going on with this knife. And hats off to WC for the expert grind on this because it's very well executed. This right here is a saber grind. You see there. Now a saber grind is designed for penetrating, cutting through clothing and such with low drag right there. Also for food preparation, really for an EDC knife, bushcrafting, field work, food preparation is a good portion of the time the knife is spent. And this has got a really, it surprised me when I first tried it, but the shape of it, the way that the handle is up and this lower flat blade is like a kitchen knife. So it really excels, not only because now that you see your hand is up off the cutting board. That's why kitchen knives, the hand goes up like that, especially on the chef's knives, is so that they can have their hand clear of whatever it is that they're chopping. So very surprising. Jason told me that this was a good food prepper, and it is. I was cutting citrus with it, and I was able to chop, and the fact that that saber grind on there is done the way that it is in that working edge is very effective. And I was a little surprised by that. So that was kind of a nice added benefit, because I would have thought this to be the last knife that I would use for food preparation, but really it made a big difference. I have struggled with food preparation with a Scandi grind because it's so fat. You know, this is an 1/8 inch spine. This is 3/16, so that would have been even much, much worse. But the fact that that saber's in there on both sides makes it really a good food prep. Really good. And also the thickness of this knife, that 3/16 goes all the way down to these grinds. It's all the way across. So now we're getting up into this area, which is really interesting. This is a Scandi grind. This is going to be exactly what you're going to see on traditional bushcrafting knives. Here are 3 interpretations right here. See that? The way that they're ground. Now also, you know those plunge knives that you see are so popular with soldiers? Just to belabor a little point here, does that not look, if you just took the tip, is that not a plunge dagger? It is. So here we have a Scandi grind with a very unique little belly in here. And speaking of belly, I think I glossed over this. There is a little bit of belly here in the knife. Now, why is that important? Now, if we had this hard edge, this shape right here, this is not a very good knife for skinning or butchering or preparing animals. WC did put a little bit of belly in there. Now, it's not a lot. I wouldn't hang my hat on that, but it is something. So this could be that transition, that belly right there definitely helps, especially when you're trying to separate the membrane of skin and fat from the meat. Not an ideal skinner, but it's considered and it's been put in there. Now back to the Scandi grind. We have the Scandi grind here, and then we have this hook, which is very, very savage. It's like a single serration is how I would explain it. And if you need to do detailed work, let me grab a little stick or a piece of wood. I can kind of explain this better. You try to do any sort of making feather sticks, or you're trying to make a bow drill or what have you with a traditional soldier's knife. That long length that you need, that 6, 7, 8 inches for penetration, it gets to the point where now you have a tip it's just hard to use. There's way too much leverage on it, and it's just unhandy with the crossbars on it. It's not a knife. It's not a knife that you're going to be doing work with. It's just a knife made for killing. Where this, with the bushcrafting influence on it, now you don't have the crossbars, and you have a working edge here that is really sharp and really good for those small tasks. Because you want to control that blade, you want to work up close to the handle, and the grind goes all the way back, and it really excels for that. It's really, really good for that. Also, we talked about the plunge, those plunge daggers. You basically, right here, you have another plunge dagger, albeit small, right there. And if you doubt that, this pressed into a slashing roll, this point right there and that extra surface, it kind of is like a kukri, that kukri style blade, which is absolutely savage and made to increase surface area. So cutting through clothing, that hook right there is very, very useful and would be absolutely devastating in any sort of a slashing attack. So shout out to WC for that. That is a very innovative design right there. And it's also going to be excellent for cutting rope. It's going to, because it's kind of protected around that point, it's going to remain sharp when you're doing, general service cutting and such up here, more utility stuff. You'll always have that to fall back on, just like you would with the serration. Also, in reverse grip, this knife is a fighting knife as well, made for that. You can see the cutting and the slashing. What that comes into contact with, that hook on there, that serration, is absolutely devastating. So it serves two roles. Very nice for field detail work. Feather sticks. I find it to be very, very useful, and you don't even all of that combat stuff and all the penetrating features on this, they don't really seem to get in the way. And a lot of that has to do with the balance too. Although this is a very big and large knife, that 3/16, the balance point is very good. And the reason why we don't see a taper back here and we see so much material on that full tang as well as the skull crusher is that it needs to off-weight all that steel on that blade. There's a lot of going on right there. But what having a balanced blade like this does for you is it makes it feel very natural in the hand. You don't have something hanging out, anything cantilevering that you're having to overcome all day long. So this is also a very important feature with a bushcraft knife, is to have that handle that's naturally fits the hand, that is balanced. Even though it's heavy, you take something that's heavy, if it's properly balanced, even a big door like a blast door can be moved with one finger because it's balanced, and the same principle kind of applies there. We go to the handles. Again, the bushcraft style handle made out of black canvas micarta. Micarta is one of my favorite handle materials. It is a resin and layers of fabric, and when it gets wet, it even gets more grippy, but I like it very much. It's a good choice. G10, unlike the Spyderco, I find it to be pretty slippery, especially when your hand gets wet. So I do like the micarta. They also went with solid pins on here for the handles. Now these handles are joined with scales. The scales go on here and they're pinned through and glued epoxied so they won't come loose. And you have a choice between open pins or closed pins. Here's a couple examples. See, we have open pins. Some guys will say we like the open pins because we can use this for lashing. If I wanted to turn this knife into a spear, I could run some paracord through there and I could lash it on there. I also would agree with WC that that's a bad idea. The last thing I'm going to do in a survival situation is run the risk of damaging the most important tool I have, my knife. Am I going to throw my knife like some idiot and break it on a rock? Not on your life. So this notion of lashing to sticks and things, I think is fantasy and not something I would ever consider. Also, we have a big swell here on the G10 that acts as, like we talked about, the crossguard. The crossguard is to keep one's hand from coming up. When I first started getting to know this blade, I was not liking the fact that it doesn't have a finger choil here. And what do I mean by that? So let's take, for example, this also is a combat knife. What's the chance of my hand running up on the Thetford Armory 13? Or back, or having this stripped out of my hand. This is common with tactical blades, is something that is never going to be ripped out of you and protects a hand, and you're never going to, even if your hand's slippery, you're never going to get up on that blade. So I kind of got used to this, and this is something you see in a lot of the knives, you know, for example, like our primitive woodsman, same thing. This is a Scandi grind, but it's got that nice finger choil there to keep that hand from sliding forward on that Scandi blade. And you need that because look at the handle. There's nothing to prevent you from coming forward. So if you're an experienced knife user, is that a problem? No, it's not, but something to be aware of. But this is a pretty big bubble. You can see a big swell, and if this knife is held properly, it is unlikely for your hand to move forward. But it is a little bit of a concern. It's always a trade-off. Yes, WC could put a finger choil on there, but now you don't have near as much utility when you want to do detailed work up right next to that blade, which this blade's kind of designed for. So I think initially I thought I wanted a finger choil on there, but the more I thought about it, I'm like, okay, I see why he didn't do that. It's because it's just not worth it. And he put the palm swell on there, or that bubble on there to prevent the hand from slipping. But this is a knife you're going to need to grip, and especially if it gets slippery, and be careful with, because you do not want to come forward on this. I mean, it's nowhere near as hazardous as the Deering, which I don't fault because it's staying true to the heritage of the Scandinavian, the Laplander blade, but it is very haunting. It's like having a dog that has rabies. It could snap on you at any time, so just know what you got. So it's not to that extent, but it's something to be a little bit, just understand it, right? Going back, big handle, even for the largest hands, you're not going to have a problem with this. It melts in the hand. It feels very good, feels very secure, and the G10 is nice. The G10, I'll have a couple things I don't like about it, is too highly polished in my opinion. I find it to be a little bit slippery, but then it could be that I've gotten so used to the rubber handles. The Thetford, the Primitive Woodsman, the Foxfire have these rubber handles, which has really become my favorite fabric or favorite scale material. I thought that the Micarta was my favorite, but I have to say, after the confidence that comes from a rubber grippy handle, I prefer this. So I had been used to this because these are the knives that my favorites right now that I'm really spending a lot of time carrying. So when I grabbed the Micarta, I immediately thought, oh, it's slippery. But then I kind of got over it. What I will do to this is I will take some Scotch-Brite, some red, and I will wet this and rough this up a little bit and get a little bit more texture on it. And a lot of it's got to do with my hand strength's not what it used to be after I broke my finger, and it doesn't grip anymore. So I'm a little bit insecure about that too. So I might be overblowing my concerns on slipping forward, but those two things are just notes that I made. Going to the back, we have, this is actually one of the neatest features of the knife. We have a skull crusher with a point on it and jimping. Why would there be jimping on the back of a skull crusher. Skull crusher, of course, or a pommel, would be in combat, whatever, who knows what situation you find you're in, you can fight this knife from both ends. I assure you, the full weight and strength of a grown man coming down on someone's cranium with this that would be a devastating blow. Very, very dangerous, which forward stabbing, slashing, or pounding with the pommel. So that's a nice feature. It's got the hidden lanyard, which I like very, very much. I have not owned a knife with a hidden lanyard, meaning it has a lanyard hole up in there, and the reason for that is it doesn't interfere with your hand. Now you take a lanyard on some knives, especially your little ones, these lanyards are always moving around. If this flips up, your hand is on it. You're struggling, you're fighting through it. It's something you have to deal with. Not a big deal, but it's just there. I put a lanyard on the Tepford just for demonstration here. Again, not really in the way here, but it could be, so it's why this was done, how I understand it, was to prevent that. You have a full clean handle, a working hand, a bushcraft style knife, something that's not going to give hot spots, and no worry about if you have to slide back or choke back on the knife that you're going to have to get in and deal with the lanyard. I like to have lanyards. So that's cool. I like that. I had never seen that before. Also, another utility built into this knife that I think is very, very clever, and I hope you can see this, is that this 3/16 stainless runs flat here, but they've put a taper on it. This is a pry bar, a wedged pry bar, and for getting that into, it's got just enough taper where it's going to be super, super strong. Ideally, knives, in a perfect world, knives are not intended for prying. I mean, just go pry on a YouTube video and the internet will set you straight, I promise you. But the reality of life is that that's one of the functions you need in a utility blade. If this is going to be a jack of all, an all-arounder, it needs to be able to do everything. So if I need to pry open a paint can or a crate or a window, who knows what, I have this tapered pommel here that's going to get down in there and be able to do some serious prying. I mean, this is no joke. It's very, very heavy. 3/16 tapering down to about an 1/8, but that 1/8 inch is going to give you a little bit more purchase on anything that you need to open. So I think that that's really a great feature. I love that about this knife. It's one of the key elements. Also, the jimping on the back. Why is there jimping? Jimping is typical on soldier's knife to keep you from sliding forward on the knife. That creates more surface area. The flesh in your skin and your thumb, or like soldiers so often wear gloves, big aggressive jimping like that gives you a lot of protection from sliding forward and control over the blade. And the fact that it's so coarse, even if you have winter gloves on, you're going to get a good purchase on that. And the same jimping is mirrored here on the back side of the pommel or the pry bar, and that's for the reverse grip. If I'm going to have this knife in a reverse grip for fighting or stabbing or penetrating, now I've got a little extra control. I've got that jimping on the back of that pommel. So that's the reason why that's there. Just look at the slashing potential of that right there. That thing is very, very scary, very dangerous. So that kind of, I think, covers the features. Also, one other thing I forgot about, 90-degree back right here, meaning that this angle from the side to the spine is 90 degrees. You want that for a survival knife because that gives you a good edge for scraping and for ferro rod fire starting. You don't want to have anything rounded over or anyone messing with that. Any good bushcraft knife should always be 90 degrees on the back, like the Spyderco or Primitive Woodsman. That's a feature you're going to want to see that on your survival knife. You don't want that rounded over, and that is on there well. All right, so have I covered everything? I'm going to bring you up close here. I'm going to share some of my concerns. First concern that may or may not apply to you is going to be the weight. And I'm going to preface it that I prefer lighter weight knives. I understand how gear, when you have to start adding stuff on your plate carrier, those ounces, they turn into pounds. And this is a heavy knife. But it's also maybe eliminating another tool. So if you can get it to do two rolls, be a survival knife and a tactical blade, then you can justify that. I understand that. I get where they're going with it. And I don't know that that's a gripe. I think that maybe comes down to more of a personal preference, to be honest. It's not anything it's not supposed to be. The second thing is the fit and finish on this knife. Now, this knife is coming in with a sheath at just under $400. That may sound like a lot of money if you're not into knives, and it does. If you're used to Walmart knives, you know, I get it. This is a custom-made knife, made in the USA, handmade, very special. Takes a lot of skill to make this, and so the worker's worth his wages. You go make this knife from scratch and tell me how much it cost you to sell it. So I don't fault anyone for that. However, at that price point, I expect everything to be real nice. Real nice. And there are a couple of issues, and again, I'm not finding fault. I brought these to Jason, and he said that this knife was a little bit rushed to get it to me, and take that for what it's worth, but I want to point it out because I'm not going to shill something and not be honest about it. And if you're going to pay $400 for a knife, this is something I think WC, hopefully they take note of it and it's already been corrected. But just a couple of minor issues I see on this, on a premium knife that shouldn't be, is that this center pin wasn't drilled very cleanly. It looks like the drill bit may have walked out a bit and augured out the top, and so there's some space there. Now this is nitpicking and doesn't affect the function of this knife or the longevity of it at all. However, every time I pick it up, I look at it, and I'm bringing it up to you because it concerns me. This is a lot of money, and that needs to be corrected. So hopefully that is corrected. So that's just one small thing. The other is that I think that the micarta is too polished. Now we've got a bead blasted surface on there, and that's typically done, you're gonna matte or black a knife for a combat knife so it doesn't reflect. Pretty common. That's pretty shiny right there on that Glock knife. But that's the, you know, like the Tepford, for example. This is a great tactical knife. Very dark, black, sinister, non-reflective. You're never gonna get away from the shine of the sharpened area, but it's pretty minimal on here. Where this is a tactical blade, you got a lot of shine there, a lot of reflection, but the body of it is glass beaded matte, and that's done intentionally to keep that signature down, which is fine. But I don't know if why this is so slippery. I think that this needs to be coarse and less polished. It's too slippery for me, and I would like to see that scratched up and definitely more coarse. The final gripe on this particular knife is a little sloppiness with the glue. The glue that's used in addition with the pins on the micarta is all over this knife. It's in the jimping. It's squeezed out the sides. It's squeezed out the back. And I haven't seen that before. And I've got a lot of custom knives. I have knives all over that have been made for me. All of these knives here, I don't have my whole collection, for example, are all handmade knives, and I've not seen that before. And just a little note. Does it affect the blade? No, but it should be fixed. That shouldn't go out that way at this price point, in my opinion. So apart from that, the slipperiness of the handle, a couple of little defects, the glue, I don't really have any gripes. Other gripe that I would have would be personal preference. But, well, there is one more thing. I think maybe a little bit the markings. Here's an up close of the blade. You can see WC. This is the first run. Now these are, I believe these are exclusively being sold right now. This is a brand new knife, a brand new design at Ridge Runner Blades. I'll put a link to it. So those orders. So if you order one of these, you're gonna get the very first run right here. WC field knife, that's what it stands for, WCFK. So that's a lot of text. I'm not a big fan of putting so much on a knife. It's a little bit busy. I like things a little bit cleaner, but again, this is personal preference. So it's not, doesn't mean anything more than that. We've got the, of course, American made, the born on date, which is kind of cool, where the knife was made, and the AB is at the AEB-L, which I think is the designation for the stainless steel. You can see also that faceted tip. The grinding is masterfully done. There are so many angles and so many things going on with this knife. The skill and precision of putting all this together. You've got the faceted tip, you've got the saber grind coming together with the Scandi grind, pretty amazing. Also, you know, one thing I didn't touch on, this area right here, again, if you're going to be splitting with this, you need to split, you know, something small for like a trap or such thing. Is that focus there? You've got a really massive wedge right there. So it is going to be a good batoning knife and for field craft for that reason. And that 3/16 spine, look how thick that is. That's a lot of splitting power right there. Here you can see my concerns there with the micarta. Let me lock that focus for you there. You can see there. A little bit of not super clean on that. The backside's fine. But I like the clothespins. You can see the pry bar. That is a very nice feature. Hidden lanyard. Let's take a look at the sheath. The sheath, in my opinion, is just as important as the knife. Just as important and often overlooked. Now mine's a bit custom. I believe my friend Mr. Barr did the custom leather work for me because he knows I like to, and well done. Nice job on that, beautiful leather. I like to carry horizontal. This Kydex sheath, these can be easily incorporated with your tech lock, whatever. So this is an easy design to lash to anything. You just have to kind of be creative. And I like that they leave it open for guys because everyone's going to carry a little bit different. So do I like the sheath? Kydex, of course. The fit is excellent. This is a nice feature right here. This knife really holds because of that big ballooned out handle. So it holds rock solid in here and you have to really get a hold of it to get it out. So having that that thumb pusher right there is excellent. I feel like I can ease it out quietly and it really assists. So that's a great design right there. We got the hole for drainage here. I think to criticize this a little bit, I think that it's already a big knife and we need things to be as svelte and thin and compact as possible. And I think there's a room to clean this up and make it a little bit smaller. I don't see, there's not uniformity in the spacing between the outside of the Kydex and these rings right here. I would want to see this absolutely the minimum, whatever that is. I'm not the knife maker, so I don't know, but what a minimum of that distance could be, I'd like to see that maintained consistently all through it. Follow the form of the knife as closely as possible so we don't have all this extra. I mean, this sheath is so big, it's almost like a shovel. You know, it's pretty gigantic. So I wouldn't overlook that. I think that's important to make this sheath as small and compact as possible so we don't have to deal with any additional bulk on there. But that, again, that's a personal preference and it may or may not be important to you. But overall, the quality of the sheath is good, made well. The fit on it is excellent. It really holds tight and it is not a problem. Speaking of which, if we're going to be griping a little bit, not everyone is no one's above reproach. The primitive woodsman is getting a little bit loose in the sheath. And I don't know if it's because of the rubber material wears down because it's soft, but I'm fearful that I'm going to lose it. So you might want to take a look at that or at least explain to us, teach us how to tighten this up without ruining it. I know guys have put it in the oven, but it will return to flat again and you can ruin all these nice contours. So keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on that. It does not come with the bead. Mr. Barr now sells, I complained because he sent me a primitive woodsman that had the glow-in-the-dark bead, which I love, love, love. It's such a cool feature. And then the second one he sent, the landslide edition, didn't have one, so he sent me so now he offers the beads. They're not the same as this one, they're a little bit different, but this is the large one, and then I took the small one and put it on the Tepford Armory right here, and these glow in the dark. And Sweet Loaf is a big fan of those. I gave her a couple. So I put the bead on there. I like the glow in the dark. It really helps in finding the knife when it's on the ground at night. These are really, really cool. So that fits on there pretty good. So that's the sheath. And I would say overall, it's a great sheath. Not a problem, just a little bit bulky and could be trimmed down. Put it on the Jenny Craig. So what's my verdict or my final thoughts or feeling on the WCFK, the field knife? Does it give me the fizz? I mean, that really ultimately is what it comes down to. And I can tell you this, I have received and continue to receive hundreds of knives. It's probably the favorite thing that subscribers like to send me. Production knives, lots of handmade knives, and I do not have all of them because if the ones that give me the fizz, I keep. If they don't give me the fizz, I pass them along. I pass them along to the warband or friends or whatever situation that comes up. I have a box of them. I like to give gifts and leave someone with them. So that really tells me the ones that I still have in my collection, for some reason, they speak to me, and I have not given them away because I want to keep them because I like them personally. They give me the fizz. This knife is going to fall into the category of one that I'm not going to give away. This, I really applaud WC for thinking outside the box and breaking some rules and trying something new that I think is put together very well. It is a knife that is going to have a ton of utility. It's going to be the jack of all trades. Now, a jack of all trades is master of none, but life is about compromise. It's always the way that it is. My only real gripes about it, it does not go to the design of it. Even the weight of it is something I can look past. I also understand my own bias when it comes to weight. I definitely prefer things that are more svelte and lightweight. That's just my thing. But a lot of you guys carry ZT knives and big folders and such, and that doesn't bother you at all. So that comes down to personal preference. My only real gripes about this are a little, some of the fit and finish is a bit sloppy in my opinion. I've been told that that will be remedied, or probably already is. So now we're just looking at the function of the knife. Is this something that I would throw into a bag to do tool rolls that would be able to puncture, I could fight with, I could protect myself with, that's going to be really at home on a plate carrier, or could be thrown into a gear bag where you could start a fire with it, you could do batoning and basic survival skills. It really does the whole package. It is a very insightful design, very unique, and excellent execution on this. I like the stainless steel. It's just, man, it's just something you can count on. It's just something that just seems tough, heavy, well-made, and reliable. Not perfect in every situation, but if you just had one to grab and you didn't know what troubles were going to face you, boy, you couldn't go wrong with the WCFK. Coming in at about 380 or so, you're going to be just at probably 400 with shipping and all that to get it to you. And these are now, the very first run are on ridgerunnerblades.com. So if this speaks to you, if it gives you the fizz, you'd like to put your hands on one, go order one. And I will give a report on it in the future after I have time to live with it and work with it. You have to spend a year with a knife before you can really say. But as far as how I feel about it now, it definitely gives me the fizz, and I will keep it in my own personal collection. Shout out to Ridge Runner Blades. Thank you to WCFK for making such a cool product, and I'm very impressed. May God bless you and your families. Please keep us in your prayers. I like that reverse grip. And we'll see you guys on the next video.